Hi, and welcome to our press workshop, New Technologies to Observe the Ocean. Our speakers this morning are Dean Roemmich, Jules Jaffe, and Stuart Sandin, all from the Scripps Institution of Oceanography.
Good morning, everybody. I hope this is the right one. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to tell you all a little bit about the Argo program, which probably some of you have never heard of, and some of you may know more than I do. But the object here will be to describe what Argo is, where it's, what it's done in the last 15 or so years, and where it's headed in the coming years. So what is Argo today? After a decade of sampling the global upper ocean by the multinational Argo program, where are we and where are we going? The main initiatives for the future are going to be deep Argo, extending Argo sampling to the full depth of the ocean, and biogeochemical Argo, which will consist of adding key biogeochemical parameters to the presently physical oceanographic array. So here's a photo in the lower left of an Argo float. These were invented by my colleague Russ Davis at Scripps and Doug Webb in the early 1990s. In the late 90s, we proposed a global array of 3,300 of these instruments. First one was funded and deployed in 1999, and in 2007, we achieved the goal of over 3,000 active floats. There's a schematic here of how a float works, and basically it has a high-pressure hydraulic pump on the inside that moves mineral oil from a reservoir inside the float to a rubber bladder outside the float. That makes the float larger or smaller, which makes it more buoyant or less buoyant, allowing it to go up and down in the water column. So the figure on the right shows a cycle of an Argo float deployed on the sea surface. It descends to 1,000 meters depth over the course of about 6 hours. It drifts there for about 9 days, then goes down to 2,000 meters and back up to the sea surface while it samples temperature, salinity, and pressure on the way up. Sends that data home, takes about 20 minutes to send it all home, then it just repeats the cycle down again every 10 days for 5 or more years. Argo has transformed oceanography, and if you've been here at the meeting for the last day and been to a few sessions, you will have heard the name Argo mentioned many times. There are some sessions where Argo comes up in every talk, others where it's only mentioned once or twice, but there have been over 3,000 research papers now using Argo data, covering a very broad range of topics, and over 250 PhD theses. Argo is central to studies of climate and global change. It's the primary data set for measuring the heat imbalance of the climate system, and it's used for all ocean global reanalysis and forecasting applications by many operational centers. So that's what Argo looks like today. Each of those dots is an Argo float. The different colors represent the contributions of different national partners, of which there are about 26. The future of this program, which you can see is global but samples only the upper 2,000 meters, the future is, well, let's sample the whole ocean, and let's do it with more parameters than just the physical ones. And just to reflect on the impact that Argo sampling has had, the upper panel here shows the number of profiles, temperature, salinity profiles per 1 degree square of the world ocean over the entire century before Argo. And there are many white or blank zeros there. There's a very large asymmetry in that there's very little sampling in the Southern Ocean historically, and there's also very little sampling in winter. Argo has eliminated those spatial biases. It's collected now 1.8 million temperature salinity profiles with a median of 40 profiles per 1 degree square, and as you can see, very even distribution. So the future, here's a deep Argo float produced at Scripps. It's a 6,000 meter capable float housed in a glass ball. Motivation, we know that warming extends below 2,000 meters. Very important elements of deep ocean circulation are below 2,000, and the models that digest Argo data are global models. They require data over the full water column. So there are at present 69 deep Argo floats. This is a pilot program at present. We will transition over the next few years to global sampling as soon as the pilot array objectives have been realized. There are 4 different float models represented in the 69 that are out there now. There are new CTDs, that is conductivity, temperature, depth sensors, under assessment because higher accuracy and stability is needed for deep ocean applications. And our plan is to extend to a global array of about 1,200 deep Argo floats. A deep Argo cycle is like a regular Argo cycle, except it goes to the ocean bottom, and you can see that here the float is shown sinking to the sea bottom where it has a drag line that keeps the float from running into the bottom, so it parks about a foot or up several feet off the sea bottom. It immediately rises up to 5,000 meters, drifts there for about 8 days, and then rises up to the sea surface. It can collect data either on the way down or on the way up or in both directions. And once it gets back to the sea surface, it transmits that data through the Iridium constellation. The other major initiative I mentioned is biogeochemical Argo. Here the motivation is to understand the fundamental BGC cycling in the oceans and thus the foundation of biological productivity, and to track long-term trends. And there's already evidence of significant changes in the distribution and concentration of dissolved oxygen in the oceans. In the upper right, you see the present locations of all floats that have sensors other than just the physical sensors. Most of these, or 300 of them, have dissolved oxygen sensors, and others have sensors for, I want to get the list right here, pH, nitrate, chlorophyll A, suspended particles, and downwelling irradiance. The lower right panel shows a map of the present location of SOCOM floats. SOCOM is a pilot, Southern Ocean pilot BGC array that's supported by NSF and NASA. And as with Deep Argo, BGC Argo is now undergoing assessment of pilot arrays in order to then expand to global sampling in a few years' time. So this is just a quick pass through the conclusion here. So whilst we need to sustain the global upper ocean sampling and the high quality data provided by Argo, we likely will expand to full depth coverage and will include sampling of key biogeochemical parameters. A reminder that all Argo data are made publicly available in near real time and in scientifically QC'd form. You can download the whole Argo data set anytime you like. It's free. The multi-institution U.S. Argo program, including the Deep Argo pilot phase, is supported by the Ocean Observations and Monitoring Division of NOAA. NOAA has supported Argo for over 15 years now. The U.S. SOCOM project is supported by NSF and NASA, with some platforms provided by U.S. Argo. And I remind us all, Argo is a multinational collaboration, and critical contributions are made by many international partners, and those are gratefully acknowledged. Thank you. We just move through the,
Okay. Be your textbook.
Oops, that's the last slide. We do want to go to the first one. Yeah, it's okay. It's that little thing down there. Okay, well, welcome to our essentially SIO press release about new and exciting things that we're doing. Thanks to our AGU hosts and also for all of you for helping us to communicate science to the public. We view that as a very important part of sustaining interest in science and in the various aspects of our environment. So I'm Jules Jaffe. I'm going to talk to you today about advancing marine science with swarms of underwater robots and machine learning and artificial intelligence, which are two things that we're doing in my lab. So we've seen a beautiful example, of course, this morning with the global coverage of Argo. But as you know, science takes place at all temporal and spatial scales. And so there's lots of things going on in the teeniest volumes to the largest volumes. And to some extent, our ability to learn about those and sample those is limited based on the aerial coverage that we have. So if we have low densities in small volumes, we're not going to learn as much as we'd like to. So the first thing, of course, is the ocean is a dynamic environment in both space and time. And how can we sample it? And so I thought I would quote Walter Munk, who's I've become kind of friends with the last few years, our most illustrious oceanographer, who we celebrated his 100th birthday this past October, and he's still amazingly lucid. And of course, we wouldn't hesitate to quote him in trying to garner support for our work, because what Walter said, and I won't do my Viennese accent here, the 20th century will go down as the century in which we undersampled the ocean, except for the Argo floats. So Dean, don't take it too seriously. And what's our solution? Well, swarms of underwater robots. And here we go. There they are. Artist conception off of Torrey pines. They're a little stretched to get it into this frame. And I even brought one. It's always fun going through the TSA people when you have something that looks like it might blow the plane up. But in this case, we didn't have any problems, luckily. So this is a little teeny float. And so what's happening now is this maker revolution is happening, and kids are getting really excited about building stuff. And it's also permeating into the ocean science and technology community, because what we're doing is cheaper, faster, better, with more density. And so I'm really excited about all of these kinds of things, building littler things that are for less money that allow us to learn things about the ocean. So I wanted to highlight one presentation, sadly already gone, this morning with our students. Obviously, Scripps Oceanography, we're an educational institution, and we're garnering what we hope will be the next generation of world leaders in understanding the oceans and our planet. So I wanted to highlight Jessica Garwood here, and that's also my student Andy Mullen, and you can see why we love doing this. I mean, I sat at an electron microscope for 5 years when I got my PhD thesis and decided it was a lot more fun going out on boats and learning things about the ocean, and also scientifically useful. So here's Jessica, and she's actually building, so we had a publication in Nature Comms last year, January, where we showed these underwater autonomous vehicles, and we, working with my close colleague Peter Franks, who's been a mentor in my learning about biological oceanography, and a colleague, showed how we could map internal waves. And Jessica is building on that work in terms of answering questions about how things get transported on shore. So one of the enigmas of biological oceanography, you have these larvae that are born on the shore. They could be sea urchins or barnacles, and then they go spend a part of their life out in the ocean. And how do they get back when they're so little and they can't swim? So we think they're actually transported by things in the ocean, but we can't always get in their reference frame. So what we do with these underwater floats is we basically make them as sort of little mimicking planktonic larvae. And Jessica did a bunch of experiments last year. We're just analyzing the data. And what was really exciting, we now see a swarm of these floats 6 of them. And what's going to happen now, they're at 3 meters depth, right? And so we're now in the reference frame of the organisms, not a mooring that's sitting in the water with stuff passing by it. And what happens is these density gradients that are being propagated as waves are actually pushing them shoreward. And if you had a mooring here, you would probably be able to predict the path, maybe, of one of these. But as you can see, it's about space and time, and having a swarm of these is really starting to give us interesting clues about this shoreward transport that's so essential for these larvae to find a fun place where they can grow up and make more organisms like themselves. So we're really starting to do more oceanography with these. And I wanted to highlight there's a special session on autonomous vehicles. Myself and Jim Bellingham, who's the inventor of the bluefin, have 2 sessions here. One is an oral session in room F150 on Thursday, and then we've got a bunch of posters, because one of the trends that you're all seeing, and I'm not trying to tell you anything you didn't know, was the use of autonomous vehicles in oceanography and how that's really enhancing the kind of science that we're doing. Okay, so this hasn't gone unnoticed, and I'm not sure we actually motivated DARPA to think about this, but they had a request for proposals that just closed a few weeks ago to ask people, well, let's build 50,000 of these small autonomous floats, and let's make them do all kinds of crazy things as DARPA imagines. And so this is a movement, I think, now towards this Internet of Things that's actually spreading into swarms of miniature vehicles that are coupled to cloud computing and all the other wonderful computational engines that are now online. But, you know, we still need data. So that's kind of fun to see this proliferate. And we've proposed that these things could be used for a number. If you remember the Gulf disaster, one of the questions was, where was the oil going? And that oil was not on the surface. It was actually at, I think, 500 or 1,000 meters. So if we had these floats, we could track it. A giant ear, passive microphones, monitoring red tides, and connecting marine protected areas are areas where we think they could make a big difference. Okay, moving along now. Classifying plankton with the help of machine learning, artificial intelligence. So I was just at a session this morning about imaging. It's really interesting to see the profusion of these technologies into the community. We put a microscope on Scripps Pier, actually 2 of them, which are on my website, which I didn't provide in this talk, but I'm happy to. And basically, you could just go online and see, like, the weather. You can see, what are the plankton off the pier? I mean, I know that's not something you were up last night worrying about, but it's really fun. I think people are interested in sports and weather because it's happening right now. So I do these little broadcasts to the university community. Look at these cool plankton that are off the pier. And of course, it's nice if you have an engineer who's amazing but also loves to dive. So these things are 24/7. And we've got now, well, who cares about plankton? Okay. So this is a beautiful picture that we got in the Caymans with one of our toad plankton systems of a siphonophore, but we're not going to talk about that. We're going to talk about why zooplankton are important. They're critical links between primary productivity and higher forms. Some of them play an important role in carbon transport. Phytoplankton, half the oxygen we breathe. They fix carbon, and of course are important in the global biogeochemical ecosystem, and the Argo floats are aimed at learning more about that on a global basis. So occasionally, what I also want to highlight was the need for in situ observation. So a lot of these things are not really they don't really do well in nets, and to highlight that, I wanted to illustrate the presence of a UPO, a unidentified plankton object here in this vehicle. So occasionally these creatures make it to land, and you know, we're all big on the UFO. This is a UPO, essentially. It's a copepod-like object. But it's in situ as well, as you may imagine. But more importantly, when we're not wondering about the wonderful science we can do, we're actually enamored with the beauty of these life forms. And you'll see in the hallway here, there's some amazing pictures where life exists in the absence of the, you know, gravitational the structural imposition of gravity. So these are colonial organisms. Here's a jelly. This is a chordate, which has a bunch of eggs in its head. The head kind of bursts open, and then the eggs come out. I wouldn't try that at home without adult supervision myself. And here you see a nice mucus net that actually drops off and creates carbon transport. So what are we going to do now? Well, we've got 800 million images, and we are going to be using these things called convolutional neural net architectures. And I asked my student Eric Ornstein to be here in the room. Eric, raise your hand if anybody has complicated questions about how this all works. Eric is your guy. And we've gotten some good results. 92% success rate in classifying certain kinds of species. And so this whole idea of using convolutional neural nets and the progression of artificial intelligence, we think is going to have a major impact in oceanography and how we can do science. We want to know what's there, we want to know how many there are, what it's doing. There's Eric is co-chairing a poster presentation and oral presentations Thursday at 4, Friday at 2. If you're interested in what's happening in this machine learning, artificial intelligence, I would suggest you go there. And then the really kind of interesting thing about what this is going to what's going to happen here eventually, and this was highlighted in a morning lecture by one of our colleagues from Villefranche, was that we're going to put these microscopes in the water, and they're going to take pictures of stuff, plankton and other things. But the computational power that is now available to us in this miniature and power-sparing form is going to allow us to actually do the classification in situ. So imagine now the satellite is just telling us what's there. We don't even have to transmit these images. So this is going to, I think, transformative is the word we use now, the way we're doing science with remote sensing. And as my last slide, I thought I would use some Wanton speculation as this was a press release, because I think there's so many interesting questions about where we're going to be in 5, 10, 20 years. So can we be better scientists using machine learning? And what are the limits to human-based scientific inferences in factors like granularity and causality? And how can the small add up to the large? What is predictable? What is not predictable? And so from your point of view, I think these are, nobody really knows the answer to these things. And I think it's exciting to think about that and have others think about that. And I think it's just going to be what's going to be happening in the future. So I apologize if I've gone over a little bit, but I will now turn the podium and microphone open to Stu.
Great. Thanks, Dean and Jules. That was a terrific introduction to a lot of the technology that's been going on at Scripps, and I want to continue that trend. I'm Stuart Sandin, and I want to introduce you to some ideas of image-based ocean observing. I recall when I was well, I wasn't yet a kid, I was past a kid, when Google Earth came out and we were able to see the planet's surface with photographs. We were able to take virtual tours of any part of the globe that we wanted to, based upon a consistent set of information. Google moved on to take that and put time series in. You were able to see the planet at different points in time and see time series in different locations. There was this invaluable opportunity for the natural historian in each of us to be able to ask questions, to observe, and to be able to learn. We could use that as society members or as scientists. Underwater, what we have today is a lot of bathymetric data, but our consistent collections of image-based data currently are lacking. But I actually think that we're at the cusp of being able to transition that to generate a set of tools that will allow us to see underwater in ways that will enable both the citizen and the scientist to learn about what's there, what it's doing, and how things are responding to a changing climate. This is, I'm going to talk about some work being done in coral reefs because it's a great system to do image-based work, but it's transferable to other subtidal habitats. This is my colleague, Dr. Tena Rongo in the Cook Islands, the only marine-affiliated PhD in the Cook Islands. He's been working with us on some image-based work. That's an image of one of the coral reefs of Rarotonga that he helped us to image, to capture, and he's sharing it with some members of his community there. Image-based data are fascinating to everybody across the globe. I want to start by introducing you to some of this type of visualization that we have underwater. Using a pairing of underwater imaging tools, cameras, deployed however you want, from swarms of robots through to an individual who's swimming a camera around, we can take a series of photographs and you can put them together. This is very related to the way we think about virtual reality, 360 video. You can compile all those photos together and you can reconstruct a three-dimensional surface, which a lot of the bottom of the ocean is. It's three-dimensional, so it goes up and down. It also has color. That color is the organisms living on top, from my perspective as an ecologist. But for other people, it's going to be geology or shipwrecks or sediments. We're able to take now a series of photographs, stitch them together, and with colleagues working in computer science, engineering, create products that allow us to virtually see anywhere underwater once you take the images. This image is from Palmyra Atoll, the coral reefs there, which is U.S. Pacific Islands, about 1,000 miles south of Hawaii. This immersive experience is something that I believe is visceral to almost everybody. We can see from young to old, doesn't matter the amount of education or economy, people get fascinated to actually see and to almost be able to touch the underwater world. Well, there are applications for sure about getting people immersed, but we're here at the Ocean Sciences meeting. Can you have the next one, the video? The ocean sciences is the second word, and what can we learn from these underwater images? Well, our work has been linked to the ecology. On a coral reef, we care about corals, we care about algae, the organisms that are sitting on the bottom, growing, and responding to a changing climate. We can take these images and we can sample them. I have a group of anywhere from 30 to 50 undergraduates that work in my lab that may never have seen a coral reef that are learning the taxonomy of corals of the Central Pacific. Image-based work to digitize, to look at how big the corals are, how many there are, who their neighbor is, where are they living on this landscape for us to be able to document that community structure. This was the foundations of community ecology, spatial patterns. And our colleagues in the forestry departments have had great imagery for years. They've been able to ask questions about where trees grow, how many can you have? We haven't been able to do it at scale. This image here is about 100 square meters or about 1,000 square feet. And we're able to look at distributions of corals. Can you pause it there? A paper that recently came out in the journal Coral Reefs that Clint Edwards, who's driving for us, documented the spatial distribution of corals. Okay, that sounds somewhat trivial, but this was our first step to get the pipeline documented. We documented the position of 45,000 individual coral colonies scattered across 16 different sites across Palmyra Atoll. This was a proof of principle. 45,000 sounds ridiculous to our colleagues who have gone and tagged them and measured them with a tape measure underwater. But we think of it as ridiculously small because all we had was 16 of these plots the size of this room. We should be able to do more. So the scientific potential is really at its infancy. This is the integration of the technology is always the first start. Okay, can we do the next one? So the technology involves being able to see underwater and to manipulate underwater, to work with three-dimensional images and to track not only where things are and what it looks like, but then also to watch things change through time. That's the big thing we care about in a changing climate. We care about how our corals or how our organisms adapting to a changing world. If we just took one snapshot, as we've done looking across patterns across from hydrothermal events or in this shallow hydrothermal leaks, et cetera. But the thing that we care about is how things are changing. We can actually go back to the same location, much like Google Earth did with our satellite flyovers, and go back in time and go forward in time. We have space and time ability to look around. Here's an example from, again, from Palmyra Atoll. There are 3 different coral colonies I want to point out. Look at this one, and this one. This is from 2014. 2015 was that big El Nino event, the hot water event that hit the Central Pacific. The Palmyra Atoll was hit by a NOAA level 2 bleaching warning, something influencing the thermal stress for corals. And we see 3 different fates. You see one coral that is bleached. We can color correct. So you see one coral that's partially bleached, just that little top on there. And you see one that didn't care at all. And now we go 1 year forward from that. What happened after the bleaching event? This is the stress, but we can now go 1 year forward. And 1 year forward, what do we see? If you're able to watch, the one that lived continued to live, and it continued to grow. This one here saw its little cap. We call it a Crestos coralline algal band-aid. It has a little band-aid living on top of it, and the coral tissue's growing back over. It's recovering. And you could call that resilience if you want. You can call it recovery. Put whatever word you want. And some have thermal stress, and they stay with lost tissue. The world is not responding to climate change with every organism doing the same thing. There are different organisms that are finding ways, finding solutions, and there's some that aren't finding solutions. We have to be able to track this with big data, and we have to be able to track this with an ability to extract data, to generate and extract data that we can imagine even if it doesn't exist today. When I started working with coral reefs, I came from a forestry lab, and I was just pretty jealous of my colleagues that could map everything. Can you go to the last one? I was jealous of all my colleagues that could actually see a forest and see where trees were and then to document, hey, if this bird flies from point A to point B, I can map it. We couldn't do it underwater. Now we can because we visualized it and we got there, and there's a great team of engineers, computer scientists that are committed to this cause. I think our next step is really getting this more integrated, to take the technology and make sure that everybody who wants access gets access. That same visit to the Cook Islands, we went and visited with the House of Ariki. The House of Ariki are the traditional leaders of the Cook Islands. Representatives from all 15 islands representing the Maori culture. If you go to the outs, their formal meeting hall, no English can be spoken, just Maori. We were invited there to introduce our interest in working there and then to talk about why we wanted to work, to get permission. And one of the conversation topic after the traditional formalities passed came to the experiences of the children in the Cook Islands. And the kids in the Cook Islands are doing what kids do everywhere, finding technology and getting lost in it, looking only at things that are rectangles, like cell phones and computers, and forgetting about the traditional elements of the underwater world, agriculture, et cetera. And they were concerned about it, the traditional leaders. We described to them this ability to see underwater, to expose people using new technologies to the underwater world, to incorporate the outdoor inside the computer, and this was something that resonated. I was really pleased. I think at all levels there's this interest in using what are virtual exposures to the natural world for education, for science, and for things that I haven't even generated yet in my head, and I think that the rest of the community, the 7.5 billion people on the planet, have great ideas of what they could do if they had access to information. I think we're at a day and age where the technology can enable our access to the information. I think the images are a great approach. Thanks. Thanks, Clint.
Okay, great. We'll now open it up to questions from reporters in the room. If any reporters have questions, please state your name and affiliation.
I have so many questions. Stuart, the coral reefs have beautiful clear water, lots of light, easy to photograph them. How do you do this in places like kelp forests, which don't have that same advantage?
Yeah, there's a great opportunity to use computers here. The process here that generates a three-dimensional model is pulling information from thousands of photographs to generate one reconstruction of the world around. If particles get in the way, those particles could be fish or muck in the water, they can get filtered out. The reality, of course, is that we have to be looking closer to the bottom if visibility is narrowed. This is where I'll call on Jules, because this will take us finding new ways to image that have that ability to do high-resolution, highly replicated imagery that maybe an individual scuba diver isn't good at. Swarms of robots, for instance, could be floating right over a surface, and we can generate that. They'll have the patience that we as individuals don't have.
So I could answer that question as well. We have a project under the Sea Grant to actually look at soundscapes in the marine protected areas. And we've been testing some of these new cameras that are extremely sensitive and commercially available with pretty good visibility. 5 to 10 meters in California ain't bad. And so the answer is we're working on that. And as Stu points out, you need to get closer with higher densities. And there are, of course, going to be optically opaque areas as well. And in that case, acoustics might help in mapping bottom bathymetry at microscales.
Hi, I'm Megan Seaver with Earth Magazine. My question is mostly for you, Jules. What sort of density are you projecting for these swarms, and are there any biological or environmental concerns with leaving them out there, or do you recover them eventually?
Yeah, so it reminds me of when I gave this talk and I got an unexpected question about would a whale eat one of these things and have go see the cetacean gastroenterologist. The part of the call from DARPA is to look at possibilities for minimal environmental impact. And some of our colleagues are actually making biodegradable floats. So at least the exoskeletons probably will dissolve. And I don't think anybody's happy about putting stuff out there, and we aren't either. But I always compare that to going to the doctor and learning in a situation where there is some risk, and hopefully we'll learn more and minimize the pollution of the environment. But these biodegradable floats, still the electronics, of course, is going to be out there. But we're trying to and certainly the biodegradable floats, I think, will be a great idea in that sense. But it's a great question, you know. And how many do we want to put out? You know, our interest is in locally looking at things called sub-mesoscale scales, which are on the order of, you know, tens of kilometers. And so, you know, ultimately, if we can talk the agencies into it, you know, sort of hundreds of them as opposed to covering the Earth with bazillions. DARPA wants 50,000 of them, but that's DARPA, you know, so thanks for the question.
Just a second. Rick Levitt, freelance. A question for you also. First of all, how much do these things cost? And secondly, you've got one there.
Right.
Can you explain to us what it does? I mean,
Sure.
it does look like, you know, Thors Hammer, sort of.
Yeah, exactly. I did see Ragnarok in 3D, actually. Okay, so the original proposal was funded under the DARPA, under the ARRA, 2009. And the sociology of that was a time when people actually it was stimulating the environment, stimulus package, and they looked at our proposal and said, this is pretty weird, but we'd like to give these guys money to try to do that. So the original ones were $1 million for 20 of them. And so when we lost 3 of them in the Cayman Islands, it was rather painful. But $3 to $5K now for these. Working with ONR, we've designed a new version of these. I'm happy to explain what we're seeing here. These are actually 2 concentric cylinders. So everyone's problem, as Dean has solved, and many of us, is it takes small changes in density to go down in the ocean and change your depth. But once you get to the surface, you've got to push yourself out of the water and tell somebody you're there, so you need to have a large change in density. But in this case, nature was very kind, because the pressure in the ocean is very large, so we only need to change a little bit. When we get to the surface, we're at essentially at atmospheric pressure, so that makes it easier for us to push these two halves apart. What you're seeing here is depth, temperature, an underwater microphone. Inside, there's a thing called it's a linear actuator with an optical encoder. When the thing comes to the surface, we have a satellite link that tells us where it is, the GPS coordinates, and we have like an RF, like your garage opener kind of thing, and you can stand there and try to localize it. And then at night, it's extremely valuable to have pulsing LEDs, because if they're bright enough, we can actually see them from pretty far off. So I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
Are there any other questions from reporters in the room?
Hi, I have a question for Dean. With these thousands of Argo floats on there, how do they get maintained and built? Like, what is the economic part of this enterprise?
So the lifetime of an Argo float is presently about 5 years, and we're trying very hard to extend that out toward 8 to 10 years, because that's probably the most important factor in determining the ability to sustain the array and to reseed it. So after that lifetime, every float has to be replaced. And so the international consortium is deploying about 800 floats per year in order to maintain the present levels, and it's done using transiting research vessels, occasionally chartered vessels, because we have to get the floats out there to turn them loose to free drift for their lifetime. But that's a major element of the effort that goes into Argo, is getting the international partners all on the same page to maintain that global distribution.
And after 5 years, do you retrieve them and recycle them? Do they have any kind of maintenance at all after they're deployed, or they just die?
It's possible to recover them, and we've recovered a number now of the deep Argo floats because they're more valuable, and we can do some post-calibration of the sensors. Most of the conventional Argo floats, they run out of battery at depth, so they eventually sink and are crushed to the ocean bottom. It's mostly aluminum, goes into sea, back into the sea eventually. But as I said, I think the most efficient way of lessening that impact is to increase the lifetime of the floats.
Are there
I
any
guess
other-
I also wanted to make a point that our intent is to recover these, because all the data's inside of them. So for now, we're going to hopefully get them all back.
Rick?
Yeah, Rick Levitt again. I have the same question I asked of Jules. What do Argo floats cost?
There are a number of different models, and the costs vary, but I'd say roughly $20,000 apiece. So what really matters, frankly, is the cost per profile. So again, if we can double the lifetime and double the number of profiles, we've cut the cost in half. And at present, if you take the total budget of one of the national Argo programs, say the U.S., and you divide by the number of cycles it produces, it's about $170 for a high-quality temperature salinity profile measurement. It's by far the most efficient or most cost-effective way of collecting that data. And if we succeed in extending the lifetime, we can push that down toward $100.
I think we have time for maybe one more question. Are there any other questions from reporters in the room? Nope. Any other
and
questions on the chat?
I just wanted to make a little announcement. You've seen the beautiful plankton pictures in the hallway here, and we've invented a 3D plankton microscope, and I'm going to be in this room from 12:30 to 1:30 if you want to come see some cool 3D plankton pictures during your lunch hour. You're more than welcome to come by. They're pretty fun. So thank you so much for your coming.
There
to
are a
this.
number of deep Argo posters in a poster session this afternoon at 4, so come on back. And, oops.
Great. Well, thank you again. And that concludes our press conference. Next up is Hurricane Harvey.